fortunately I got her in there and I didn't drop her. But I didn't set her down correctly either. We ended up on opposite sides of the stage. It threw me off. The music director starts singing my lines for me, which throws me off even more because I know the lines, but I might have been off a little bit, and that just messed me up. And at the end of the song, I didn't even make it to the end. I lost it completely. I was so frustrated at myself. I headed off stage, and then I realized, oh, I've got 3 more lines at the end of the song. So I had to come back on stage to deliver the lines, and then I walked off. And I got to the wing of the stage, and I was so irritated and frustrated and overwhelmed about how much I had botched it. I literally went to the tables out there, and I just, I had my meltdown. Took me a minute, maybe about 2 minutes, to fume. Went and walked across the back of the stage, pushed the outside door open, went outside and just stood in the cooler. At least it was cooler than the theater. I learned later they didn't turn the air conditioner on in the theater that night, and I was sweating like cats and dogs too, so that wasn't helping me either. Nonetheless, I cooled off outside, both literally and metaphorically. My point, we all have meltdowns. And she says basically, do not doubt yourself. I will not accept self-doubt. I paused for a moment. I was upset that I know I can do it well, but I didn't. I'm confident that I can nail this piece. I did it Tuesday night. At least it's where we are. I nailed it for where we are in learning it. But I was frustrated that these little things, once you start moving things on stage and you're trying to get the whole groove in so that you can nail it every time, I was frustrated that these little things kept throwing it off. I was fine with Tuesday night because I get one night a week, sure it'll be off. You get those offs out early. But 2 out of 3 nights, I'm not okay with that. I want things to move forward. So I said as much to Marta. I don't doubt myself. I know I can do it. I'm going to nail it next time. I nailed it last night, but I'm frustrated that I didn't do it tonight. Now, the next day, so Saturday morning, I spent like another day off, and I spent the whole day working on The Little Mermaid. But nonetheless, I got to thinking more. We have such a great family at the theater. But this show in particular, and there's usually different connections that we make during the show. One of my last ones when we were doing Matilda is I got to connect with Zach. Zach was like my buddy back in the dressing room. And so that was a connection that I made. And here Zach is now at church, so I love it. But we all have connections. And in this show particularly, I have to do a lot of work with Ariel. So Marie and I have kind of connected. She has been particularly encouraging to me. In spite of my constant drive to see all the flaws, to critique myself, and to try to get better each time. I told her yesterday, I was like, you could easily just roll your eyes and keep moving forward, just leave me behind, because you've got it all, you're a pro. But nonetheless, you continue to encourage me and be so helpful. And I get really frustrated when things go backwards and don't get better. So, I got to thinking yesterday about doubt. Is there some inkling of doubt in my frustration? Honestly, I don't know. I'm trying to do self-work. I'm reflecting on it. I'm thinking a little bit deeper. I could just move on and say, no, I definitely know there's not. But I'm trying to take it in a little bit more. So I don't know yet. Maybe, maybe not. But what's more is that this has made me think more about the connection between doubt and meltdowns. So that's my recent meltdown. What's yours? I'm going to get on to some Bible meltdowns right now, but before we do that, I would like for you to grab a pencil, grab a bulletin, or I think in our being off, we didn't even get the connection cards in the bulletin today, so I apologize. I'm sorry. Text the word welcome to the church telephone number. We'll connect that way for today. But I want you to grab a pencil or your phone or whatever. I want you to write down 3 of your doubts right now. Whatever they might be. I don't care what it's about. I don't care if it's about work, if it's about family, if it's about a relationship, if it's about something small or silly, or it doesn't matter. If it's something big and overwhelming, I don't care. 3 doubts. And I'm very serious about this. Write down your 3 doubts. I just want you to hold on to those. Now, obviously, I'm not coming around to check the papers. I'm not going to ask you to share it. But I really do want you to think and reflect on 3 doubts that you have right now. And if you're online, maybe you'll be even brave enough to type them in the chat. Who knows? What do when we doubt someone or something? Any thoughts on that? What do we do when we doubt something or someone? Any ideas? You can answer that question.
Question them.
Question them? Yeah.
Walk away.
Walk away. Sometimes.
We try to justify why it won't work out.
Try to justify, yeah, it's not why it won't work out. Isn't that interesting? Most of those are kind of like the glass half empty responses. That's what doubt so often does to us. Especially if doubt goes unexamined, it keeps us from trusting people and situations. And what happens when you feel that you can't trust anyone or anything is that you have an epic meltdown. You crawl into a hole and you don't come out. You stop trusting people. You stop trusting yourself. You become OCD even, which is interesting. Did you know that OCD is sometimes, I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but I've learned that OCD is sometimes called the doubting disorder. In other words, I guess the idea behind it is you doubt things, so you do them over and over and over until you're sure that it's done. I don't know, I'm not a psychologist. I read it. Don't quote me on that. Or maybe when you doubt and it leads to a meltdown, you just fall apart and become unable to function well in the world. Doubt can lead to all those things. And while not all of those are epic, while doubt itself is not some epic thing in our life, doubt is a kind of meltdown in and of itself, if you'll go with me for a moment. Not necessarily a bad meltdown. Let me explain what I mean by that. Doubt, you see, is a mental state in which your mind is suspended between two or more contradictory propositions or ideas or things out there, right? Think about that for a minute. You're unable to be certain of if it's A or B or even C or D or E. Doubt is kind of like this indecision between belief and disbelief. You hear that? Doubt isn't disbelief. Doubt is the uncertainty of whether you do believe it or don't believe it. And so emotionally, doubt can involve uncertainty, fear, anxiety, angst, distrust. Doubt can often result, as y'all kind of talked about, in some kind of inaction. You walk away, you miss an opportunity. You can even become obsessed with your mistakes. That might be my problem with my meltdown, but we'll see. We'll see. I'll keep reflecting on that. So, yes, doubt is a meltdown of sorts. Some big and some small. Okay, so great, Jason. What's the epic meltdown story of doubting for today? Obviously, I'm going in that direction. Well, I have two for you. First, and this is the most obvious, because if you pay attention at all to the church year and the church calendar and the stories that we typically look at the Sunday after Easter, then you know that today is Doubting Thomas Day. One of Jesus' own disciples, someone who had perhaps spent years witnessing Jesus' miracles, traveling with Christ, and learning at Jesus' feet, he famously doubted that his master had been raised from the dead. An entire week passed before he saw Jesus after Jesus died. Plenty of time for questions and doubt to creep in and gnaw at his mind. From John chapter 20, starting verse 24. Now Thomas, also known as the twin, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. This is when Jesus appeared after he was dead and resurrected. So the other disciples told him, "We've seen the Lord!" But Thomas said to them, "Unless I see the nails marked in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand even into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and he stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Many of you have heard me talk about this story before. I've done it several times over the years. And if you have, then you remember that I believe Thomas is a model of real faith. Most people just want to call him a doubter. And I say, no, Thomas is a model of faith. He is honest about his doubts, and Jesus meets him right where his doubting is. Right in the midst of his doubting. Jesus meets him and does what? Says, go ahead, Thomas. Put your hand right here, right here. Had Thomas not been honest about his doubts, he would have never touched Jesus' side. He would have never touched Jesus' hand. He would have never crossed that threshold into trust of Jesus Christ. Sometimes when we fail to be honest about our doubts, we're actually preventing our trust. More on that in a moment. Suffice it to say for now, Jesus uses Thomas' doubt to deepen his faith. Because doubt is not the opposite of faith, and it is not an obstacle to faith. Doubt is part of the journey of faith. It is a gift that leads and deepens faith, and that is the lesson of Thomas. Story number 2. Sarah and Abraham. This is a great story. You get part of it in Genesis 17, part of it in Genesis 18. This is that story where Abraham and his wife Sarah, two of the most important figures in the Old Testament, they both followed God faithfully through a lifetime of challenges and trials, but they couldn't quite bring themselves to believe one promise that God made to them, that they would give birth to a son in their old age. In fact, they both laughed at the prospect. That's the story I want to look at. Once their son Isaac was born, however, Abraham trusts in God. It has grown so much by this point that he was even willing to sacrifice that promised son when God asked. He didn't, because God said, whoa, no. But he trusted so much that he was willing to follow anything that God said. Listen real quickly to the two places where the meltdown happens in the story. This is it from Genesis 17. Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at age of 90? You can just hear him, right? This is like the belly laugh. It says what? He fell face down. This is a guy who's rolling on the floor, hysterically laughing at God. I'd call that a meltdown. Might not be the tantrum kind of meltdown that you might think of when you think of meltdowns, but meltdowns aren't just, those kind of things. Meltdowns come in all kinds of ways. Then a few verses later in Genesis chapter 18, it says this. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old. There was a conversation outside the tent between Jesus and these three guys, that it says they're guys, but it also says they're the Lord. We've looked at the story before. And Sarah overhears, this is where God comes again and says, you're going to have a child. Anyway, Sarah overhears it, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing, so Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I'm worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? I'm not going to go into the details of Sarah's comment, because you can read into that yourself. But let's just suffice it to say that there are moments like this in the Bible that just make for really good soap opera comedy. Sarah's worried about her age and having this. Anyway, both Sarah and Abraham so doubt that they fall into hysterical laughter. Yes, it's a meltdown. A laughing meltdown, but nonetheless a meltdown. The truth is, the Bible includes a dump truck full of doubters. And God doesn't give up on any of them. In fact, God says, doubters are welcome. God didn't ask people to pretend to be certain. God accepted them, doubts and all. God asked people to be faithful and step forward through the doubt to lean into faith even in the midst of doubt. God did that with Thomas. God did that with Abraham and Sarah. And God does that with us. Listen to this one. I got a third one I'll throw out there for you real quickly. In Matthew chapter 28. This is, again, after the story of resurrection. It says this, the the disciples went to Galilee to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. You hear that? Who doubted? The disciples. The 11 are the disciples that we call the what A word?
Apostles.
The apostles. The apostles did what? Doubted. The people on whom the church was built and founded doubted. But it doesn't end there. This is pretty incredible, though, that the pillars of the church have doubts. Not only that, but what else is incredible is that Matthew doesn't even try to cover that fact up. You would think that if you're writing to people to try to bring them into the faith, into the church, that you might want to leave out that the founders were doubters. But Matthew's like, no. That's got to go in here. But in the face of these apostles' doubts, look at what Jesus says next. This is Matthew 28, starting in verse 18. Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. You hear that? Jesus didn't say, hey, go make disciples once you're certain about everything. Jesus didn't say, go deal with that doubt, and then I'll call you, and then I'll go with you. Jesus looks at these worshiping doubters, and Jesus says, go on, get out of here, you doubters. Go and tell the world the good news about me. Yes, go tell the very news that you are doubting right now in this moment. Sure, it seems too good to be true. Get up anyway and go, and you know what? I'll go with you. That's what God says. That's what Jesus says. It's a Danish theologian named Søren Kierkegaard. He suggests that for a person to truly believe in God, that person must also doubt his or her beliefs about God. That's pretty profound. That would seem to go against everything you and I have been taught since we were a year old. Listen to what he means, though. He may not be meaning what you think he's meaning. You see, the doubt is the rational part of a person's thought that's involved in weighing evidence. Without the doubt, the belief has no real substance. Think about that for a moment. Belief is not a decision based upon evidence. A decision based upon evidence is judgment. That's what happens in the courts, right? The evidence is presented, you look at it all, and you make a judgment of what is true and what is not true. Jesus does not call us to make a judgment. In fact, Jesus says over and over, what? Don't judge, lest you be judged, right? Jesus calls us to belief. Belief, or as I have said again and again over the years, a great translation of belief in the Greek is trust. Trust. Because in the Greek, it's not just cognitive belief. It's belief with legs. It's belief that has action. Belief that moves in a direction, right? That's what Jesus is saying. Trust and believe. Belief involves making a commitment in the midst of doubt. So according to Søren Kierkegaard, to have belief is at the same time to have doubt. Or to say it a different way, belief and doubt go hand in hand. Thomas is a great example. In the midst of his doubt, Thomas could have chosen to not trust. But instead he chose to trust and believe. You know how I know? Because if he didn't trust, he wouldn't have stuck his hand in Jesus' side. If he didn't trust, he'd have never put his finger in those nail scars. To hold that hand out and to say, you know what? Yes, I've got doubts. I don't know if this is real, but I trust. And then he was changed when he touched. That, my friends, is the same invitation that Jesus makes to us today. Be honest. There are moments in our lives when we all have doubts about a great many things. And that is not a lack of faith or trust or belief. But your faith, your belief, your trust is what you choose to do with that doubt. Do you walk away? Or do you step into the direction of what you hope and know and want to be true? Will you reach your hand out and put it into Jesus' side? Put it into Jesus' hand and lean in. That's trust. That's following Jesus Christ. Even in the midst of doubts, taking the next step forward. It's what Jesus calls us to. Faith through doubt. For brothers and sisters, that is the road to salvation. Amen. I want to invite you to come to the table today. As we do each and every week, I want to invite you to come whether you have strong trust or you aren't sure even what the next step is. Come in the midst of your doubt. Come with your doubts on your heart and lay them before God as we prepare ourselves to receive this meal, knowing that if you, like Thomas, are willing to share your doubts, Jesus will meet you right there and beckon you forward, showing you exactly what the next step is. Our deacons and elders, come on forward. They're going to pray over this holy meal for us. If you're at home, grab something to eat, crackers, juice, milk, cookies. I don't care what it is. Come on forward, deacons and elders. I don't know who you are this week. Come on forward. Nobody's getting up. I need 4 people to come forward and serve communion. You are welcome to partake in this meal wherever you are on your journey. If you are willing to eat,